Hello and welcome. I'm glad you made it here. I haven't seen a video like this anywhere on YouTube, so I'm excited to present this to you. We are going to be covering the most in-depth explanation of all the parameters, settings, sliders, checkboxes in DaVinci Resolve 19 on the export settings page and what they do, going in-depth, going super in detail on how to use them, the benefits, the drawbacks, and how to make your videos look better without using too much space. Now this video will be comprehensive and information packed. So I recommend grab yourself your journal, notebook, a nice pen, piece of paper, somewhere you can write down your notes, thoughts, ideas, concepts, definitions of terms, all these things and that I'm going to be talking about here today in this video. You can keep it in one place, you can refer back to it in the future if you don't remember how to use something or what that term meant. So I highly recommend grabbing a journal, specifically pen and paper, so you can remember it better by using your hand and writing out long form notes of specific terms and concepts. That will really help cement these ideas and help you use them in the future for your videos on YouTube. And for the notebook, I will have a short glossary of terms in the description, labeling the biggest key concepts and ideas in there so you can reference that if you didn't get them all down while taking your notes. Or if you're lazy, you can copy and paste them into your online note-keeping software like Notion, Obsidian, Logseq, whatever you want to use. That's the inferior way to take notes, but I will let you do it for the sake of this video. And grab yourself some tea. I don't have any here, but I will have it at the desk, coffee, or your beverage of choice, and join with me on this ride, and we will do this together and have a lot of fun along the way. Now, who is this video for? This video is primarily focused on people using DaVinci Resolve 19, but it will also translate to other NLEs like Premiere Pro and Final Cut, Avid even, probably, I don't use it, so most likely this will translate to most NLEs. I'll be focusing on generally good practices for most videos. I can't cover every use case and every edge case in parameters and settings. Obviously, there is a plethora of different options for those use cases in specific areas where you're going to need them, and if you need them, you'll probably know. This will be covered just a general basic concept of good render settings for most people, optimizing file size to quality. And that's our main goal here, is to retain the maximum amount of quality in our videos while also minimizing the amount of size the file is. And the TLDR, if you're not into all these nitty-gritty details, every single parameter, slider, checkboxes, whatever, definition, term, concept, idea, in this video, I'll have a timestamp right here you can skip to get all the render settings that I talk about, and you can use it in your video for those purposes. Now stick around until the end of the video because I have a surprise for you. And don't skip ahead. Watch the whole video. Just kidding, you can skip ahead. I just have a surprise for you after you're done doing all the legwork of learning how to use Codecs, how to use the export settings in Resolve to the best of its ability and use it as a tool for you. Without further ado, I hope you really enjoy this video and let's dive in. Alright everybody, we are at the computer and I am on the deliver page as you see here in DaVinci Resolve, and there are three render settings panels: the video panel, the audio panel, and then the file. We will go through these sequentially in the order they are presented, and first up is the video panel. Now right here, format is just what the media file is stored in, and these are commonly called container formats or just containers. A container holds multiple data streams: video, audio, subtitles, and metadata within a single file. It is a package which makes it useful for transporting from one location to another, as everything is embedded in one file. An analogy for a container is a package being sent through the postal system. The package will have content, video and/or audio and subtitles, and information about the content, metadata. In the case of the package, the metadata is the shipping label, where the package is coming from, and the destination, the weight of the package, the carrier, and stuff like that. It's the information about the information of what you're actually sending. So it's the data about the data, and that's why we call it metadata. In the same way, a container will have information about the codec used for the media in the package. In our case, we are going to be using the H.265 codec for the video and linear PCM for the audio. All of this will be inside a QuickTime container, which will have the .mov file extension. Now this is the codec, as we explained before, H.265. and we'll use this to encode the video. And depending on which container we choose above right here, will change which codec we can choose to encode our video with. And I'm recommending the H.265, wow, there's a lot of words, HEVC codec, since it has been around long enough and has good hardware acceleration support. Now the terms H.265 and HEVC are interchangeable. H.265 just follows the naming conventions of the ITU International Telecommunication Union standard. And a fun fact, the ITU Video Picture Experts Group, also known as VPEG, and the ISO/IEC Moving Picture Experts Group, MPEG, collaborated on the same video coding standard HEVC or H.265. What is even more cool is this codec is still being developed. Version 10 was just released on July 29th of 2024. And I'll be using the term H.265 for the rest of the video to avoid any more confusion with terms, numbers, names, and I told you, grab a pen, grab a journal, write down these terms, what they mean, so you can reference them as you watch this video. And now here's where we get onto the nitty-gritty details. So as a precursor to codecs, I want to quickly explain software and hardware encoding. A lot of newer processors, also called CPUs, come with dedicated hardware for encoding and decoding video. These allow for quicker exports and easier playback of supported codecs, while also being far more efficient. Hardware acceleration only works with supported codecs on a given device. It takes much of the load off of the CPU and generally speeds up the process quite a bit. Now, if your device does not have the dedicated hardware for codecs you want to use, the program will just use the CPU for software encoding instead. Now, this comes with some drawbacks, but also some positives. First, software encoding will generally be slower for the CPU. In some edge cases, does disprove this, but the CPU will use far more resources to get the task done versus offloading the task to the dedicated hardware as mentioned previously. By using more resources, it is not as efficient as hardware acceleration. One positive of software encoding is that the CPU generally can do a better job of encoding the video at a high quality, while also keeping the file size down, and this is called bitrate efficiency. And in other words, the CPU can encode the video more efficiently by maximizing the amount the video can compress and minimizing the overall size of the file. This leads to a better quality video at a smaller file size, which is what we are all striving for, depending on your needs, of course. Now, just to preface this part, it is important to state you will have different options depending on what you have for hardware acceleration. QSV and NVENC are well supported, AMD is less so, but they all accomplish what they are intended to do. QSV, or also called Intel QuickSync, uses the hardware acceleration on the CPU. More specifically, it's the dedicated hardware that is on the CPU die. NVENC will use hardware acceleration that is on the GPU. And commonly, NVENC is used in more server workloads, so server workstations with a lot of GPUs and a server farm that basically just renders video all day. That's more like that situation. And QSV was really only meant for quick transcoding of files on the fly. For example, it would be for smooth timeline playback and scrubbing, like as we see here. It can use Intel QuickSync to transcode the video file so we get really quick scrubbing playback on our timeline. But now it is a viable option for rendering your videos to drastically speed up workflow and rendering of videos. Although there is a slight cost to quality, but the time savings usually make up for it. Now, network optimization. What does this checkbox do? The network optimization checkbox will allow the metadata, and this, as explained before, is the information about the video and audio file in the container, to be received first when streamed over the internet. And a good practice is just to leave this checked on for web content. So, when streaming the video, it knows how long the video file is and other essential metadata in doing buffer sizes for streaming content. Resolution. I recommend just setting this to whatever your timeline resolution is, and if you lower the resolution to get better playback while rendering, as I sometimes do, you could change the timeline resolution to 1080p. It'll be a lot less taxing on your processor and information, but just remember to put your timeline resolution back up to 4K if that's what you recorded in for when you export. Otherwise, it'll try to upsample your export. And I recommend 1440p or 4K video for YouTube, as YouTube will automatically create a VP9 transcode of the video, which results in higher data rates and ultimately better quality. And if your video is uploaded at 1080p, it will just use the AVC codec, which is the minimum standard for YouTube. The frame rate, I also recommend to keep this at the same as your timeline settings, as if you change your frame rate around here, you might start to experience judder where your frame rates don't line up and it has to drop a frame at even or at odd intervals. So Sometimes you'll have 2 frames and 3 frames and 2 frames and 3 frames, and that can lead to juddering because it's not an even amount of frames in the same amount of time. And then chapters for markers. Now, if you take the time and set up little markers like in your timeline, we'll just go here to show this. If I do timeline here, marker here, and then these are different sections of my video, I go on the deliver page, and I say chapters for markers, and I want the blue ones. This will actually embed those as chapters in the video file, which is useful for YouTube content and stuff, as you don't need to put those sections timestamps in your description to get those nice little sections on your YouTube video. I would use this, but honestly I'm too lazy sometimes and I don't use it. So one thing to note is that this feature is only available in QuickTime or MP4 containers. So right here, this format container, QuickTime, if we choose QuickTime, we'll have this option. And if we choose MP4, we'll have this option. Okay, next up, Encoding Profile. This is the profile we set for video in the H.265 and just the H.26x standards. The encoding profile is composed of between main profiles, different profile levels, and you'll see those in a file. If you do media info, it'll say main 10 or main 444 like this, and it will have a level either like 5.1, 6.0, just stuff like that, and that's determined based on the maximum data rate of the video file for decoding purposes. I explained that before in a previous video. If you want to go watch that, I'll leave that link in the description. It is a video on more specifically video codecs for cameras, but I'll also include that information there to help you out. But recommended just the main profile unless you know you shot in 10-bit color profile like you did on a camera. If you know you shot in a 10-bit color, a 10-bit format, I would change this to main 10, so it keeps the 10 bits of color information in the video file. So hopefully one day when YouTube decides to upgrade or update to supporting 10-bit color on display or playback devices, you don't have to do anything with your video file and it can stay there. So it's a good way to future-proof. Now, what are keyframes, you might ask? Keyframes are used by the encoder to get reference information from. These keyframes are also called I or intraframes. Setting this to automatic is recommended, and frame reordering is recommended and beneficial for B frames. This will increase compression of the video file while keeping the same perceived quality. And this can lead to a more demanding processing power to encode/decode the video file. And that's needing to keep track of which frames to encode, decode, and which frames to display in the memory. This will lead to a greater buffer size needed when encoding or decoding the video file. In other words, in a more or less technical explanation, when encoding, the encoder needs to keep track of the actual order of the video frames that the video is going to display from the decoder, but the actual order of the video frames that it's encoding to make the file format smaller. Frame reordering just means they're not going to all be in the same order as they are when you render the video. Okay, now time to get a little bit more technical. I'm going to pour myself a nice cup of tea. I'm drinking a black tea. I forget what it's called. The name is escaping me at this moment, but I will leave that in the description. All the great information will be in the description. And it's really good. It's got like a dark chocolate brownie smell, flavor, aroma to it. All right, so here's the tea. I don't know if you get a really good look at it, but she is looking good. She is tasting good. So take a break, get your mind to relax a little bit, jot down your notes, give you some time to catch up. Now time to get a little more technical. But stay with me, it'll be fun, it'll be exciting. Let's break down more of what these frames are. I frames, P frames, and B frames, respectively. These frames are arranged into a GOP, also called a group of pictures. These groups of pictures can either be open GOP, closed GOP, long GOP, or short GOP. And I'm not going to these here, but you can look them up for yourself if you're curious. So we have these frames. What are they and what is their purpose? I or intra is a frame that is a full picture, as the prefix intra means within or relating to itself. It refers to macro blocks within the same frame for compression. This compression is called spatial prediction, which eliminates spatial redundancy inside the frame. And a quick side note on macro blocks, or CTUs in the H.265 nomenclature. These are effectively blocks of the video frame just broken down into smaller chunks. These are the blocky artifacts you see when a video is a very low bitrate, and is often referred to as blocky or pixelated video. In H.265, these macro blocks can be as big as 64 times 64 pixels. And using spatial prediction in iframes, DC the macro blocks surrounding it and predicts the pixel values of neighboring pixels. And it uses various prediction modes as displayed here. The macro blocks, in a way, guess the pixel value of the ones surrounding it, based on a given prediction mode. Now, if you're still with me, this is really, really cool. Once the pixel values are guessed, the encoder looks at the difference between the predicted values and the actual values. Remember that iframes are a full picture, so we know the value of every pixel in the image. This difference is called residuals. The residuals are what is left after subtracting the predictable part. So a simple equation would be the actual image values, which is our source of truth, are whole intra-frame, and we subtract the predicted image values. And this equals our residual image values. Now it does this an insane amount of times within each frame, and it gets even more complicated within multiple frames, which is called temporal prediction, which is referencing frames that come before and frames that come after it. Okay, I'll not go into any more detail on this here since this is a little out of scope of this video. Now let's take another little break and drink some tea. Alright, let's break down p-frames. P-frames or predictive frames use inter-temporal prediction and intra-spatial prediction. The prefix inter means relating to another or between. These frames reference I or p frames before it, using temporal prediction modes to see what stayed the same and what changed from the previous frame. This is called motion estimation. It then uses a motion vector to calculate the direction of the motion between the reference frames in the frame it is compressing. Said more simply, this can be seen as a ball that moves from one location in a reference frame to another location in the current frame. In our example, only in the moving regions macro blocks are encoded, and the regions macro blocks that stay the same between the reference frame and the current frame are discarded and seen as redundant. The key distinction here is that the encoder is only predicting the motion of the pixels and regions from frame to frame. As we talked about before, the encoder is doing the same thing and calculating the residual image values using temporal prediction. These residual values are like a code that helps the video be decoded into something that more represents the full image while saving space, called compression. Now, B-frames, or also called bidirectional frames, operate fundamentally the same as P-frames. The key difference is that B-frames are bidirectional, which means that they can reference frames preceding it and succeeding it in a given group of pictures. Alright, after that little hiatus, I hope that we have a better explanation of what these types of frames are, why it uses these frames, how they're beneficial for compression and efficiency. Now on to rate control. Rate control, in a general sense, allows us to specify roughly how big we want the file to be, or the specified quality of the file. For this, we have two types of encoding we can use: variable bitrate and constant bitrate. Constant bitrate is used to keep the bitrate of the video file constant and not over a specific limit. This is useful for streaming video and keeping it small enough to send over the internet with minimal dropouts. This focuses more on consistency in transmission over quality. Variable bitrate lets the encoder use more bits for stuff that is more complex and harder to encode, and dynamically uses less bits for stuff that is easier to encode. Now, I recommend against using this explicit variable bitrate parameter in DaVinci Resolve, but constant quantization parameter, which is what this is a form of variable bitrate. It's just under a different setting. For our purposes in DaVinci Resolve, we will use constant quantization parameter, as explained before. This is admittedly not as good as using CRF, which is also called constant rate factor, in FFmpeg, which is a command line tool for processing audio and video files. I highly recommend, if you want to get into this and look at the results and see how different codecs affect different things, how rate control types affect different things in this codec, you can use FFmpeg and the libx265 library for encoding, and you can get really deep, really nerdy, really into it and see what it's actually doing to the video file and what's best for your use case and scenario. Now, depending on our hardware, there may be different options laid out. We will use CQP for encoding our video and setting the quantization parameter to a value between 0 and 51. Look ahead just means how many frames will it look ahead to determine how it is going to compress those frames in the video. And this AQ, which is automatic quantization parameter strength, we will just leave this set to 8 because it really doesn't affect the image that much and can sometimes use a lot more resources in rendering the video file. Alright, now onto the advanced settings section. In this section, I will not cover every single parameter for the sake of time and brevity. I want to stay focused on the most important choices that I think will help you create and deliver high quality videos. And I usually prefer to explicitly tag the file with color gamut and gamma. These are just the boundary of a given color space and the tone curve meant for playback displays, respectively. And there is some discrepancy about the so-called QuickTime gamma shift, specifically on Mac OS, unfortunately, I know. And I'll link to an article that talks more in depth about it. Since I primarily use Windows and Linux more and more every day, I will set primers to be Rec 709 and Gamma 2.4 to target most display devices that people are going to be watching content from. And I will not get into the weeds of Gamma 2.2 versus Gamma 2.4 versus BT 1886. And should I do a Gamma trim here, as that will be best kept as a topic for another video. Bypass re-encode when possible. I'll just leave this checked on. It'll probably almost never get used, but bypass re-encode basically allows you to get fast delivery for rough cuts in a studio environment. For example, if you're using ProRes or DNX HR as an intermediate editing codec, and you want to export a rough cut for a review, you can select bypass re-encode and you can render the video in the file format that the media files are already in. Another instance where this may be useful is if you are doing a simple edit and just want to render what you put together. A key point is that this only works when there are no visual effects or color grading applied to the clips. The clips need to be more or less a direct copy of the files on the timeline. Said in another way, if the video codec we input, what we put on the timeline, is exactly the same as what you want for the output on the export, DaVinci Resolve will try to bypass re-encoding of all the video clips and just wrap them in the same container file format. This will be much faster render times as it will not need to be any encoding of the video media. And there are more options in this panel, but this is all we're going to look at for today. Use render cached image, obviously that's when you select playback, render cache, and you can select it. Those cached images it can use to render. Alright, so we got through the video panel, congratulations. Now let's move on to the audio panel. In the audio panel we have the option here if we want to export the audio or just the video files, and if you need this checked off you'll probably know for your specific use case. Otherwise this will almost always be left on, because if you don't want audio, you'd probably know. The audio codec, as we saw with video, is essential in creating media that is easily transported from one device to the next. And to highlight again the codec, which is a portmanteau for coder decoder, allows us to encode and decode media files into a bit stream that is used for a playback device. Very similar to a video codec. Different purposes, different mediums, but accomplish the same thing. For my specific purposes, I generally tend to select linear PCM for the audio codec. As this is an uncompressed file format, it'll be exactly the size we tell it to be. That is to say, if we select a sample rate of 48,000 Hz and a bit depth of 24 bits, we simply multiply the bit rate times the bit depth. So we select here 48,000, which is the standard for video, and the bit depth of 24 bits. We will get 48,000 times 24 equals 1,152,000. So that's how many bits. And this is the total number of bits per second, or BPS, and we then divide that by 1,000 to get the number in kilobits to make it easier to read. And that divided by 1,000 equals 1,152 kilobits per second. Now we take that and multiply that times 2 since we have two audio channels, left and a right, traditionally for web content, and this will give us a bit rate of 2,304 kilobits per second. Now sometimes we are limited on internet speed or throughput, and we want to be able to efficiently send files over a network without having packet loss. This is where more compressed codecs come in. For our instances, our audio codec will not affect the total file size much, so we will just use the best available uncompressed codec, that is lossless, which means no loss in fidelity. Now the choice is up to you. If you don't care much about the audio codec, you can use AAC, Advanced Audio Codec, and export your audio in that, which is a highly compressed lossy audio codec. It gets the job done psychoacoustically, but does not retain all of the details in the audio bitstream. But at least for YouTube, once you upload your video to the site, the video stream will be transcoded into AVC if quality is lower than 1440p, or VP9 if the quality is 1440p or higher. It will then transcode the audio stream into the Opus audio codec. And for my purposes, I like to start with a higher quality file, despite it being larger, knowing YouTube will essentially degrade it anyways. Now you might be asking, why not just upload everything in a very uncompressed, visually lossless format? Well, a few reasons. You might not have that much storage space to save that video file. For example, if we upload in DNxHR at 4K, and the video is roughly 10 minutes long, we are looking at a file size of around 50 gigabytes. DNxHR uses roughly around 800 gigabytes of storage per hour of footage. That is a lot of storage. Now, if you have the means of storing a file that big, go right ahead. But I have a suspicion that will not be useful for most people, since we want to save our video files locally and have backups of our media in case anything happens to them. I would suggest using a more efficient codec like H.265 or H.264 for older hardware devices. Back to the audio panel, and the output track, almost always set to +1 stereo, is what will be rendered when we export our media file. To learn more about busing and how that works in audio post-production, I recommend checking out Jason Yadlovsky, which will be linked in the description. He's got a great YouTube channel that explains Fairlight, the whole audio process in DaVinci Resolve, and goes really in depth there, and I highly recommend his channel. Audio normalization. This raises or lowers the overall volume level of the audio track. This is based on parameters given for audio normalization. Here, if we select it, we can select YouTube. When we selected the YouTube standard, it will increase or decrease the audio level until it reaches the specified threshold, either peak or loudness. And whichever is reached first by increasing or decreasing the audio level, it will be set to that value. Now, what is the difference to optimize to standard versus normalize to standard? Optimize to standard will make sure your levels will hit the loudness target and be under the true peak value. In essence, this modulates your audio track to reach the standard. Instead of once it hits the value, it stops. This allows the audio track to be more consistent throughout the video, and there will not be huge jumps in quiet to loud parts of the video, which is a great thing to have. And gone are the days of a show on TV being turned up because it's so quiet, and all of a sudden a commercial comes on and blows your eardrums out because the audio difference was so drastic. That is why we have standards, and as you see here, the ITUR BS70-4 is a standard, but we'll use YouTube's decided standard, and that target level is -1 decibel true peak, and target loudness is -14 loudest units full scale, or loudness LKFs, LUFS are the same thing. Alright, in a nutshell, this is the audio panel. Now on to the last, but not least, the file panel. Now here's a tip you didn't know you needed until now. We can use this fancy little wildcard symbol, like this, and we could input variables for a video file if we already had it. So like we can actually put like camera number, camera name, if it's in this video file, and append it to wherever we want, which is super useful. But I just like doing this show timeline name, because I'll name my timelines. For instance, this one just called render setting short. It's a video I posted on Shorts, and then timeline name, and then we could do project name. Yes, we can use the wildcard symbol for the file name to auto-populate the name field for our video. DaVinci Resolve calls these wildcard symbols metadata variables in the documentation. And this is very handy when you get into standardizing your naming conventions for folders and video projects. An awesome tool I like to use for this is a little product called Posthaste. Want a video on it? Let me know in the comments. Using wildcards are great for reusing what you already named your project or timeline. Also, adding version number like version 1 or version 2 in the beginning of a file can help in making multiple revisions to a given project. So at times when I render my video, I'll actually do v1 underscore to know this is the first version. And then if something happens, I change it, I renew it, I'll do v2 so I have both video files completely rendered, just in case I ever want to go back to it. And hopefully this can help us all not name our timelines timeline 1,
timeline 2, timeline 3, etc., or our project names SFD, ASKLM when we slam our fingers on the home row of the keyboard. I know I'm not the only one that does that. Now, changing the render speed from maximum right here to a slower speed can help if we're getting render issues in DaVinci Resolve. A specific one you'll probably come upon is the dreaded GPU memory full error, especially in big or complicated projects. This can also be useful if you are still wanting to get work done on your computer and want the video to render in the background. You can allow it to not use all of your system resources. So that about covers all the most important export settings in DaVinci Resolve. And I have one last tip for you. One last tip. This is what you came for. Since we have all our parameters select perfectly how we want it, how we like it, we want to use it for every video on YouTube that we export. We want to think about what to do, where to go. This is for you. We can save these as a preset. I will go here, hitting the little meatballs UI icon. We can save as a new preset, call it preset, render settings, video preset. Hit OK. Now this is saved. Look at that. And I'll have a free download of this preset I set up here in the video for you to use in your projects. And feel free to change any of the settings and make your own preset for your specific use case.
Ooh. Ooh. We did it. We made it to the end. Congratulations. That is no small feat, and I am proud of you making it to the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed the content, learned something new, applied new concepts, or got a nice refresher on the render settings in DaVinci Resolve and what these sliders, parameters, checkboxes, and things actually do to your video and how they help you make better content. And if you're still here, watching all the way to the end of the video, leave a film reel emoji in the comments to let me know that you are a true supporter of Destined Wander and what we do here, and you love to continue to learn and apply those concepts in your daily life and share them with other people. If you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them down in the comments below. I love reading them. I love interacting with everybody in the comments. It is super fun and engaging, so leave your thoughts, comments, opinions, ideas down in the comment section, and I'll be sure to read them and reply to them. And please give the video a thumbs up if you really like the content, and it lets us know that you are enjoying it and you want to see more of this type of content. And hit the subscribe button, hit the bell notification to be notified when we post a video, and continue to see our content that we post here on YouTube. And if you found value in this video and you really love our work, you can support us through a recurring donation through Patreon or through a one-time donation through PayPal. One of the best things you can do is share the video with somebody you think this will be beneficial to, either a friend, a family member, or somebody else who edits video, so they can learn and apply these concepts as well. With that being said, thank you for supporting Destined Wander and believing in what we do here on the channel. It means a lot to me, and I really appreciate all the support we get through you guys, either just leaving comments, liking the video, watching the video, and sharing the video. It helps us continue to make more content, make more engaging videos that are fun, entertaining, but also, and most importantly, informative. And one last thing, you matter more than you could ever imagine. I just want to leave us with that here today. Even though this video is about Codecs, I want to get back to the basis and the heart of why I started this channel, just to let everybody know that you are truly loved and truly cared for by the God of the Bible, by Jesus Christ, who died on the cross for your sins and for mine. I just want to share that with everybody I know and let you know that you are loved beyond comprehension, and God's love for you is immeasurable, and that is truly a beautiful thing and a blessing that we can all come together and receive with thankfulness and receive with gratitude. Thank you for being on the journey of learning together. It is such a fun and exciting time. I'm really excited for what we got here in the future on the channel, and a couple other channels I will let you know that will be down in the description below. Check it out. So I got some videos in the works for those channels, and I'm really excited for what we have in store. So stay tuned, stick around, and that's a wrap. This is the video, and I'll see you in the next one. That being said, peace, love ya, and bye.